Okay, so imagine you place an ad in the personal section of the newspaper and 10 men write back. Now imagine you write to all 10 of them, personally, with their names, remembering things they told you about their dead mothers. Now imagine you do this every single morning, before breakfast, for 5 years. That was the morning routine of a woman in Indiana named Belle Gunness. By the time we got to her, on the night of April 28, 1908, there were at least 12 bodies buried under her hog pen. And almost none of those men had ever told a single person they were coming. Hi, friends. Tonight we open the file of Belle Gunness, the woman they would later call the Lady Bluebeard, the Black Widow of Porte, Hell's Belle. More than 100 years before Tinder, Belle Gunness was running a romance scam out of an Indiana farmhouse, and the men who matched with her did not get ghosted. They got buried. Here's what gets me about this woman. She was not, at least outwardly, unhinged. She was not impulsive. She was not the kind of person you would have pegged. By every single account, she was the most normal-looking woman in the room. Big, strong, Norwegian. A widow twice over by her 40s, running a 42-acre farm at the end of a dirt road called McClung. She kept chickens. She baked. Her neighbors borrowed milk from her. Her 3 little kids ate breakfast at the same table every morning before she walked them to school. You guys, the woman had a piano in the dining room. She also, by 1907, had a wooden box in her bedroom containing letters from more than 20 different men, each of whom believed he was about to marry her. Some of those men were already buried under her hog pen at this point. She just hadn't gotten around to throwing their letters out yet. So here's the system. Belle would place an ad. It always said roughly the same thing. Comely widow, large farm, seeking gentlemen equally well provided. She placed these ads specifically in Scandinavian language newspapers in the Midwest because she was looking for a very specific kind of mark. Lonely Norwegian-American men in middle age, men with property, men with no wife at home to ask questions. The letters would pour in, and she would write back. She wrote 8 to 10 of these every morning. The postman in the Porte said you could set your watch by it. And if you have ever done online dating, you already know exactly how this part of the story feels. She was a phenomenal writer. She would remember everything. Their dead mother's first name, the kind of food they grew up eating in Norway, the hymn their late wife used to sing. She would write it all back to them in her next letter. I think of you. I cannot wait to walk our orchard together. It is the exact same playbook every catfish uses on Hinge today. The exact same playbook the Tinder swindler used. The bait is the feeling of being seen. The hook is the feeling of being chosen. And then, somewhere in the middle of every single one of those letters, she slipped in the same instructions. Sell everything, convert it to cash, sew the bills inside your clothing, and tell no one you are coming. I cannot stress to you enough how many men did this. They sold their farms. They drained their bank accounts. They sewed their entire life savings into the lining of their shirts because a stranger they had never met in person told them to. And then they got on a train. And then they disappeared. The first one we know about was a man named John Moe. He came up from Minnesota in 1902 with $1,000 in cash. He stayed at the farm for about a week. The neighbors saw him walking the orchard with Belle twice. And then they didn't see him anymore. The next was a man named Henry Gerholt from Wisconsin. He brought $1,500. He wrote one postcard back home that said, "I like it here. Please send me seed potatoes." And that was the last thing he ever wrote to anyone. The next was Ole Budsberg. He brought the deed to his entire farm. His grown sons would eventually identify what was left of him. And it just kept going. Year after year, man after man. And Belle would be at her desk every morning, writing fresh letters to fresh men in fresh states, sometimes while a previous one was still on the property. I think a lot about the postman, just dropping off the mail every morning at this normal-looking farmhouse with this normal-looking woman. The only thing that was even a little weird about the property, the only thing, was the hog pen out back. Because Belle's hog pen had a 6-foot-high wire fence around it. Hogs do not jump 6 feet. That is not a hog fence. I need to pause for a second, because I want to talk about our kids. And I know that everyone wants to skip past this part of the story, and we are not going to skip past it. Belle had 3 children that she was actively raising during all of this. Myrtle, who was 11, Lucy, who was 9, and little Philip, who was 5. There is a photograph of them. I'll show it to you in a second. They look like every school photograph you've ever seen. These 3 children lived in the same house as the bodies. I have spent a lot of time with this case, and I genuinely do not know what to do with that. Because the kids weren't allowed in the basement. The basement was where she did the part of this work that I am not going to make you sit through. And the kids, somehow, knew not to go down there. On the morning of April 27th, 2 of those little girls came to school crying. Their teacher would later say that the girls told her their mother had beaten them the night before for playing in the stairwell. The stairwell led to the basement. Okay, we are moving on. The last man Belle ever wrote a letter to was named Andrew Helgelien. He was 49 years old. He was a bachelor farmer in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and he had been corresponding with her for about 16 months by the end of 1907. The last letter she sent him ended like this: "No woman in the world is happier than I am. I know that you are now to come to me and be my own. My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Andrew brought $2,900 to that farm, his entire life savings. He had wired it from his bank in South Dakota. The teller at the bank in Porte actually, get this, the teller actually tried to intervene. Like, looked at Belle, looked at Andrew, looked back at Belle, and said, "Mrs. Gunness, are you sure you don't want to leave at least some of this on deposit for safety?" She took all of it, in cash. That was a Wednesday. By Friday, Andrew was gone. I want to tell you what happened that Friday night, because this is the moment that I find more chilling than almost anything else I have ever read. Andrew sat down at the kitchen table for dinner. Belle made coffee. She put extra sugar in his cup, because in one of his letters, he had told her once, in passing, that he liked his coffee sweet. And she had remembered. She had also put strychnine in it. Strychnine paralyzes your body, but it does not knock you out. So he is sitting there, fully conscious, unable to move a single muscle. And Belle stands up. She walks across the kitchen, picks up a wooden bucket, and carries it past him toward the back door. She stops next to his chair. She looks down at him. And according to the story Ray Lamphere told a clergyman before he died, she said, "The pigs are waiting, Andrew. The fence out there is 6 feet. Pigs do not jump 6 feet. The fence is for what comes back up." And then she walks over to her writing desk in the corner of the kitchen, and she opens the drawer, and she takes out a single sheet of paper, and she shows it to him. "Your brother will write to me," she says. "I have the letter ready. I wrote it for Ole. I wrote it for Henry. I will sign it with tears." She had already written the cover-up letter to his grieving brother, with his name on it, before she killed him. It was sitting in her drawer. For 1 second, after she stopped talking, Andrew's right hand still worked, so he used it. The next morning, she made breakfast for her 3 children and walked them to school. But here is where it falls apart for her. Because Andrew had broken one of her rules. He had told one person he was coming. His brother. His older brother Asle Helgelien, back in South Dakota, who had begged him not to do this and who had not been able to stop him. When 2 weeks passed and no letter came, Asle wrote to Belle. Belle wrote back. 4 pages, tear-stained. "It is with tears flooding in my eyes and my heart overburdened with grief that I write you about your dear brother." She had probably written the same paragraph, with the same closing, to 4 other grieving brothers over the years. But Asle did something none of the previous brothers had thought to do. Asle had kept every single letter Belle had ever written to Andrew, all 20 of them, from across a year and a half. and Asle sat down with that stack of letters, and he read them in order, and he saw the thing that nobody else in any of the previous cases had ever managed to see. He saw the pattern. Sell everything. Bring cash. Sew it into your clothes. Tell no one. Every letter. Every man. He got on a train, but Belle felt him coming. Maybe she got a letter, maybe she got a feeling, I don't know. But what we do know is that in the last week of April 1908, she did 3 very specific things. 1. She went into town and rewrote her will, leaving everything to her 3 children. 2. She went to her lawyer and told him on the record that her former farmhand, Ray Lamphere, had been threatening to burn down her house and kill her. 3. She bought an enormous amount of kerosene and put it in the cellar. That was Monday. On Monday night, 2 of her daughters came home from school crying about the stairwell. On Tuesday night, she played games with her 3 children at the kitchen table. She put them to bed early. She gave the new farmhand, a man named Joe Maxon, an orange to eat before he went to sleep. At 4 o'clock on Wednesday morning, Joe Maxon woke up to the smell of smoke and discovered that his bedroom door had been locked from the outside. He broke it down with his shoulder, jumped out a 2nd-story window, and ran for help. By the time the neighbors got there, the house was past saving. In the basement, when the ashes cooled, they found 4 bodies. 3 of them were the children, lined up neatly. And the 4th? The 4th was a woman, who everyone assumed was Belle Gunness. Except the woman's head was missing, and she was 5 inches shorter than Belle Gunness, and 100 pounds lighter. Asle Helgelien got off the train in Porte 2 days after the fire. He went to the sheriff, who told him very politely that, yes, sadly, Belle was dead and the case was closed. Very sorry about your brother. Asle did not accept this. Asle went out to the farm himself. He stood in the yard. He looked at the 6-foot wire fence around the hog pen. And then he asked Joe Maxon, the new farmhand, the one who had survived, whether there were any places on the property where the ground had been dug recently. Joe thought about it, and then Joe said, yes. Mrs. Gunness used to tell him regularly to bring wheelbarrows of dirt over to the hog yard to fill in soft spots. He had always wondered why. They got shovels. And what they found out in that yard over the next 2 weeks? Friends, I really do not want to walk you through it, and I am not going to. I will tell you what they identified. They identified Andrew. They identified Belle's adopted daughter Jenny, who had been 14 years old when she vanished 2 years earlier. Belle had been telling everyone the girl had gone away to school in California. They identified John Moe and Henry Gerholt and Ole Budsberg. They kept identifying men, and by the end of the 2nd week, the diggers stopped counting, because every shovel they put into that yard hit something. The official number is 12. The number people still whisper is 40. When they cleaned the sack that held what was left of Andrew, they noticed his right hand was still closed. They opened it. Inside was a single strand of brown hair. He had taken it with him.
So that brings us back to the body in the basement. Ray Lamphere, the ex-farmhand Belle had so carefully framed in her will, was arrested, tried, convicted of arson, sentenced to 20 years. He died of tuberculosis in prison 1 year later, and before he died, he confessed to a clergyman. He said the woman in the basement had not been Belle. He said Belle had brought a stranger out from Chicago a few days before the fire. He said she had killed that woman the morning of the fire, dressed the body in her own clothes, killed her own 3 children with the same poison she had used on every man she had ever buried, and set the house on fire to cover her tracks. He said he himself had driven her to the train station before sunrise. He said she had taken everything she owned with her. For 20 years after that fire, the sheriff of LaPorte County received reports of Belle Gunness sightings. 2 a month, on average. From Chicago, from Minnesota, from places no one in that town had ever heard of. In 1931, a woman in Los Angeles was arrested for poisoning an elderly Norwegian man with arsenic for money. She was the exact age Belle Gunness would have been. She looked like the photographs. In her belongings, the police found a photograph of 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, who several people who had personally known Belle Gunness swore on the record looked very much like the children who had died in the fire. She died of tuberculosis in the jail infirmary awaiting trial. She was buried under the name Esther Carlson. Belle was never found, neither was the head in the basement. It has been 117 years. So, be careful out there, friends. Some letters are not love letters. Some are invitations to disappear.